Hello Orchid friends, how are you? Welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time watching my video, my channel is all about orchids. From what orchids I have, how I grow them, my thoughts on certain orchid topics, to what orchids in my collection are blooming, etc. So if you want to follow along my orchid hobby adventure, please consider subscribing to my channel and turn on the notification. Today in this video, we are going to repot this mini Phalaenopsis orchid. This is an orchid that belongs to a colleague of mine from work, and this video would give you a step-by-step of what I did and also some of the thoughts and ideas I have about certain steps and why I did them the way that I did. So let's have a look. So if we go back in time to August 2019, without any advance warning, I arrived at my desk, seeing this orchid on top of my desk with a post-it that says, "Please keep me alive, Grace's plant." Right? So my colleague was going on a vacation. I think she was going to be away for 3 weeks. So obviously nobody's going to be able to give this orchid water, so I was the best person to help take care of this orchid in her absence. And one of the reasons is because words are out that I know how to grow orchids. So I have had a few orchids coming to me because of my quote-unquote reputation, my orchid reputation. Anyway, so right off the bat, if you just take a look at the orchid, well, the flower spike was already dried, blooms are gone, and at a first glance, the roots seems to be okay. I mean, there were definitely some dead roots. But what's inside the media, we don't know unless we repot this orchid. If you just look at the leaves, I think this orchid is hydrated because you don't see any wrinkles on any of the leaves. However, the topmost leaf, those two leaves are smaller. So when orchids are not growing as big leaves or bigger leaves, you know that this orchid in some capacity to a certain extent is not happy 100%. So this video clip now is after I took it home. I just wanted to take a closer look at the orchid, the leaves, and also the media, and see maybe the root are okay or not. So I was really taking a closer look, from all angle all angle that's available to me, right? All aspect of this orchid, I need to take a closer look to determine if I should repot it or not. But obviously, we're talking about a repot video, so in the end, I decided that I want to take this orchid out of the container, take out all the moss, and just really have a look at the root and see how this orchid is really truly doing. And since we are talking about orchid leaves, for those of you who are new to this orchid hobby, when an orchid has reached its mature state, and assuming all conditions are met, orchid leaves should be the same size as its previous leaves. So if this orchid is growing smaller leaves than prior leaf sizes, then there is something that the orchid is not happy about. Okay, so before I take this orchid out, the best thing that you can do really is to soak this orchid to allow the media to be wet, so saturated that it's easier to remove the moss, and also remove moss that are already attached to the roots. It'll be easier for you to do, trust me. And sure enough, after I clean out all the roots, all the moss, you can see that there are some dead root tissues toward the center, right? These are the dead roots are in the middle of the moss, and it was just, suffocated or died for whatever reason. So we have to trim it off, right? And so for the scissor that you use, make sure you want to sterilize it with hydrogen peroxide, alcohol, or use flame, right, fire to scorch it, just to disinfect, to avoid cross-contamination, spread of virus through the scissor, etc. So after trimming all the dead tissues off, then we can proceed with hydrogen peroxide to once again spray down the roots to further disinfect. Some people also use alcohol, and sometimes I do that too, but usually when I use alcohol is because I see mold that I want to get rid of, right? Otherwise, I think hydrogen peroxide is very safe and completely good to use just to spray down the roots to disinfect. Some people use both, but sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. It just depends on what I see. Now, after that, you ideally want to leave this orchid to dry for about 24 hours. There are two ways that I use from time to time, right? The first way is this way. You put it back to the original orchid container, right, in an upright position, just like how it was. But then another way is, because I have an orchid rack, I can actually put it, leave it upside down. And then another way of upside down method is I simply just turn it upside down and put it on top of the container of its original container, right? So there are two ways to do it, and that's just to, allow excess water trapped in between leaves to just, drain out. And after the 24-hour period, this is what it looked like. The root system is dry, so it's now in gray silvery, color. This 24-hour period allows us to once again observe the root, because sometimes after they dry, you can further determine whether more roots are to be trimmed off or everything is good to go into the media. And this one obviously is already completely dry, so I also went ahead and trimmed it off. Because we trimmed off a lot of dead root tissues from the center, so in the middle it's kind of hollow, so I actually wanted the moss to fill up that void. So I used my hand, kind of forming a soft fist, and use that as kind of like the size I want the orchid to be, and then slowly pack on moss, and then eventually fit it into the original plastic container that this orchid came with. Because of the amount of root this orchid had, I did not actually pack the moss too tight. I wanted this orchid to have more of a fluffy type of moss media in this container. Otherwise, I'm afraid that the root will continue to die due to suffocation. I also did not plant this orchid down to the very bottom of the plastic container. I actually wanted this orchid to have an additional maybe half an inch at the bottom. I mean, some moss was reaching the bottom, but for the most part, I wanted to have additional drainage area for this orchid. So this is what it looked like after the repot was completed. And here you see, I actually forgot to mention, I reuse the moss that this orchid came with. This is not really recommended, however, because I did not have any moss left. So I had to figure something out. And judging by the way that the moss looked at the time, to me anyway, I think it would still last for another 2-3 years, no problem. So the solution I soaked this orchid with before I took it out of the pot was not water. It was in fact hydrogen peroxide. So in a way, I was hydrating this orchid and also moisten the moss, but also disinfecting the moss altogether with hydrogen peroxide. This is not something that I recommend doing, because in case hydrogen peroxide doesn't kill anything that's problematic in the old moss, but because I did not have any moss at home, so I had to reuse it. So do it at your own risk. Anyway, overall, I think this repot is a good repot because otherwise this orchid may continue to suffer and just produce smaller leaves. But hopefully after the repot, this orchid will bounce back and continue to produce bigger leaves and eventually bloom for my colleague. This is all I have for you today. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you would like to get more orchid related videos from my channel, please subscribe and turn on the notification. I want to wish you happy growing, and I will talk to you in my next video.